In the chronicles of time, hidden within the pages of Scripture, lie the echoes of God's eternal voice. These are not just ancient tales. They are living testimonies of faith, love, and divine power. This is Divine Chronicles, where every story reveals the hand of God. The cries of the oppressed rose like a storm over Egypt. The land was filled with power and fear, a kingdom built on the backs of slaves. The Hebrews, once welcomed in Joseph's time, had become a people of burden, chained by Pharaoh's cruelty and crushed by his endless demands. And yet, even in the darkness of oppression, God was writing a story of deliverance. Among the cries of mothers and the sound of the whip, one humble home held a secret hope, a child, small, fragile, yet chosen. When Pharaoh's decree commanded that every Hebrew boy be cast into the Nile, one woman refused to surrender to fear. With trembling hands, she wove a basket of reeds, sealed it with tar, and placed her baby inside. Every tear that fell into that basket was a prayer, a desperate cry to the God who sees. The river carried the child gently, rocking him beneath the warm light of dawn. The water glistened like liquid gold, and though unseen, Heaven's hand guided his tiny vessel through the reeds. Then came the miracle. Pharaoh's daughter, bathing in the Nile, heard the soft cry. When she opened the basket, she saw the baby, his eyes bright, his face peaceful, his tears glistening like dew. Her heart was moved. In that single moment, divine compassion pierced through royal pride. "This is one of the Hebrews' children," she whispered. Yet she could not bring herself to let him die. The heart of a mother, though born of Egypt, became the instrument of heaven. She took the child into her arms and named him Moses, drawn out of the water. The one who was drawn out would one day draw out a nation. But before the miracle could unfold, there was another grace. By divine arrangement, Moses' own mother was chosen to nurse him, her heart rejoicing in secret. She held her son again, whispering promises of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob into his tiny ears. Though raised in Pharaoh's palace, the seed of faith was already planted within him. Years passed. The boy who floated upon the Nile now walked among kings. The very river that once threatened to destroy him had carried him into destiny. Every step Moses took within the palace courts echoed with the quiet footsteps of God's plan. He was educated in all the wisdom of Egypt, surrounded by gold, glory, and gods made of stone. Yet within him burned a silent question. Who am I, and why was I spared? The answer would not come from the halls of Pharaoh, but from the heart of heaven. Even before he could speak of freedom, freedom was already written upon his soul. Even before he could lead a people, God was already leading him, through providence, through mystery, through mercy unseen. The boy who should have perished became a living promise, a symbol that no decree of man can silence the will of God. Sometimes, deliverance begins not with thunder or fire, but with a mother's tear, a basket on a river, and a faith that refuses to surrender to fear. Thus began the journey of Moses, a child of destiny, hidden by faith, chosen by God. The child who once floated upon the Nile had grown, no longer a fragile infant in a basket, but a prince within the palace of Pharaoh. Moses walked the marble corridors of power, dressed in silk and gold, trained in the wisdom of Egypt. He spoke their language, learned their laws, and moved with royal grace. But even amid the splendor, something in him did not belong. Every morning he watched the city awaken, the shining temples, the statues of gods carved from stone, and the endless line of slaves marching beneath the sun. He was taught to believe Egypt was divine, yet his soul whispered otherwise. It was as though an invisible hand tugged at his heart, a reminder that he was not of this kingdom. One day, Moses left the palace walls and wandered among the fields where the slaves labored. He saw men beaten, women crying, children born into chains. The air was filled with dust and despair, the cries of his people, though he did not yet call them his own. But then, one sound pierced through all others, the crack of a whip and the scream of a man collapsing to the ground. Moses' heart pounded. He could not turn away. Something ancient stirred within him, the cry for justice written in his very blood. He rushed forward, his hands trembling with rage and mercy intertwined. And in a single, irreversible moment, the Egyptian taskmaster fell lifeless to the sand. Silence. Only the wind spoke. The Prince of Egypt had become an outlaw of the crown. Fear flooded his soul. He looked around, left, right, and buried the man in the sand, hoping the desert would hide his sin. But word travels faster than sand can cover secrets. Soon Pharaoh knew, and Moses fled for his life. He left behind the marble halls and golden chariots, trading power for wilderness, wealth for exile. Each step felt heavier, each breath more desperate. Once he had been called son of Pharaoh's daughter. Now he was a fugitive with nothing but dust beneath his feet. But the same God who guided his basket upon the Nile now guided his weary steps across the wilderness. After days of wandering, Moses came to the land of Midian, a place of quiet hills and hidden streams. By a well he found kindness, shepherds, daughters of a priest named Jethro, and among them, Zipporah. For the first time in years, his heart knew peace. He helped them, drank water, and sat beneath the shade of trees that whispered of new beginnings. Time passed. He became a shepherd. A man who once commanded servants now led sheep across the barren hills. Every sunrise over the desert became a silent sermon. Every night beneath the stars was a reminder that heaven had not forgotten him. The staff in his hand was simple wood, yet in the eyes of God it was being prepared to part seas. In the quietness of obscurity, Moses was learning what the palace could never teach: humility, patience, and the power of surrender. There, among the bleating sheep and whispering wind, the prince became a servant, and in that transformation, heaven smiled. For God was not finished with Moses. The desert that seemed to end his story was only the beginning of his calling. Sometimes God must take us into the wilderness, not to punish us, but to prepare us. Because only in silence can we hear his true voice. Years passed in the wilderness, and Moses had become a man shaped by silence, solitude, and shepherding. Every sunrise painted the desert with gold, and every sunset whispered of purpose yet unseen. He had learned humility, patience, and the quiet strength of faith. Yet the question still lingered. Why was I saved? Why am I here? One day, as Moses tended his flock near Mount Horeb, the mountain of God, something unusual caught his eye. A bush burned with flames, bright, alive, yet strangely unconsumed. Moses squinted, unsure if his eyes deceived him. The fire blazed, yet the leaves remained green. The air shimmered with a presence he had never known. Curiosity stirred within him. He stepped closer. And then he heard it. A voice, deep and commanding, yet tender as a father's whisper. Moses. Moses. He froze. The voice continued. Do not come any closer. Remove your sandals, for the place where you stand is holy ground. Every instinct in him screamed awe and fear. The desert seemed to hold its breath. The flames reflected the power of the unseen, and the ground beneath him pulsed with divine energy. I am the God of your ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the voice proclaimed. Come now, for I have seen the suffering of my people in Egypt. I am sending you to deliver them. Moses' heart raced. Fear and doubt collided with awe. How, me? He asked. I am not eloquent, I am slow of speech. How can I lead a nation? How can I face Pharaoh? The voice was unwavering, full of authority and grace. I will be with you. When you speak, I will guide your words. You will be my instrument, and I will make your weakness a testimony of my strength. The burning bush did not consume itself, just as God's power was not limited by human fragility. It was a sign that even amidst fire and trial, divine purpose could shine without destruction. Moses fell to his knees, humbled and trembling. He had fled the palace, survived the desert, and yet now he stood in the presence of the Almighty. He realized that every step of his journey, every loss, every loneliness, every lesson, had been leading to this sacred encounter. God spoke again. Go, Moses, lead my people. I will give you signs, and through you, the world will witness my glory. In that moment, Moses' fear began to transform into faith. He understood that being chosen was not about his own strength, but about surrendering to God's will. The desert had prepared him. The solitude had strengthened him. And now, destiny awaited. In the fires of Egypt, in the chains of the oppressed, in the heart of a nation ready to be set free. Sometimes God's call comes in ways that amaze us, not with armies, but with fire. not with grandeur, but with quiet holiness. And only those who listen with a heart ready can hear the whispers of eternity. Thus began Moses' mission, a shepherd of sheep now called to shepherd a nation, a man shaped by silence now chosen to speak God's words. Moses descended from Mount Horeb with a heart both fearful and faithful. The encounter with God had left him trembling, yet resolute. The shepherd of Midian was now called to face the mightiest king of the world, to demand freedom for a nation enslaved for generations. He looked at his staff, the simple rod that had guided flocks through the wilderness, and realized it would soon part seas and strike down the powers of Egypt. He felt unworthy, a man who had once fled the palace in fear now tasked with confronting Pharaoh himself. But the voice of God echoed in his mind, steady and unwavering. "I will be with you. Go and lead my people." With Zipporah's blessing, Moses returned to Egypt. Each step back across the desert brought memories of the palace, the gilded halls, the soldiers, the power he had abandoned. And yet, he also carried the hope of his people, the prayers of generations, and the promise of God's covenant. When Moses arrived, he met his brother Aaron, a voice of support and courage. Together, they approached Pharaoh, standing in the golden courts of the most powerful king on earth. Moses' heart pounded as he spoke words not of his own making, but of the Almighty. "Let my people go, that they may serve the Lord their God." Pharaoh's face hardened, his pride like iron. He laughed at the thought that a single man, a former prince, could command the freedom of an empire. But Moses, guided by the Spirit of God, remained steadfast. Every plea, every sign performed, was not for Pharaoh to see, but for the world to witness the power of the living God. God performed wonders through Moses. Water turned to blood, frogs filled the land, darkness covered the kingdom. Each miracle was a reminder: human power is fleeting, but divine authority endures. Moses watched as Pharaoh's stubborn heart resisted, yet he never wavered, never doubted, because he knew that God's plan could not fail. And yet, amid triumph, Moses also experienced the weight of responsibility. He saw suffering, fear, and doubt among his own people. He comforted, encouraged, and reminded them that the path to freedom would demand patience, courage, and faith. Through every confrontation, every act of judgment and mercy, Moses was being transformed further. From shepherd to prophet, from fugitive to leader, he was learning the sacred art of obedience, of aligning human will with the divine. Sometimes the journey to fulfill God's calling is filled with fear and doubt. But courage is not the absence of fear. It is moving forward because of faith. Thus Moses returned to Egypt, not as a prince, not as a shepherd, but as the servant of God, carrying the hope of an entire nation. Pharaoh's heart was hard, his pride unyielding. Even as Moses and Aaron pleaded, the king of Egypt refused to release God's people. So God's power began to move in ways that shook the land to its core. The Nile, the lifeblood of Egypt, turned crimson, a warning written in water. Frogs filled every corner of the kingdom, their croaks a chorus of God's judgment. Gnats and flies swarmed the land, pests over fields and homes alike. Cattle fell sick, darkness covered the sky for days, yet Pharaoh remained obstinate. Through it all, Moses witnessed suffering on both sides. The Egyptians blinded by pride, his own people yearning for freedom. But he did not falter. He prayed, he guided, he encouraged the Hebrews to trust in God's plan. Every plague was a testament. Human power can resist only so long, but God's will is unstoppable. The 10th plague would be the most devastating. Death would pass over the homes of those who followed God's instructions, yet strike down the firstborn of Egypt. Families trembled, and the air was thick with sorrow and anticipation. Yet in the midst of grief, hope remained for those who obeyed. God's protection, symbolized by the blood upon the doorposts, became a sign of mercy, salvation, and divine faithfulness. At last, Pharaoh's pride crumbled. With a heavy heart, he released the Hebrews from slavery. The people of Israel gathered, carrying their few possessions, stepping into freedom they had longed for, yet never fully dared to imagine. Moses led them with courage and faith. Through the wilderness, they walked toward a promise written not on stone, but in the heart of God. Every step was guided, every fear met with reassurance. Though the road ahead was uncertain, the Israelites now followed a shepherd who had been tested by fire, sand, and divine calling. Sometimes liberation comes not through might alone, but through patience, faith, and obedience to a higher plan. Even when the path is frightening, God's hand moves unseen, guiding the faithful toward hope and freedom. Thus, Moses stood as the instrument of God's power, leading his people from bondage toward the promise of a new beginning. The Israelites had left Egypt behind, their hearts filled with hope and fear. The desert stretched endlessly before them, golden sands under a blazing sun. But Pharaoh's army, proud and relentless, pursued them, their chariots thundering across the land. Panic rose among the people. "What have we done?" they cried. "Why did we leave Egypt, only to die in the wilderness?" Moses lifted his staff, his eyes reflecting both fear and unwavering faith. "Do not be afraid, stand firm," he said. "The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still." The waters of the Red Sea lay before them, vast and impassable. Behind them, the army of Pharaoh drew near. It seemed impossible, hopeless. Yet in that impossible moment, God's power would be revealed. Moses stretched out his hand over the waters. A wind, mighty and divine, swept across the sea. The waters parted, rising like walls of crystal on either side. The ground beneath was dry, a path forged by heaven itself. The Israelites walked through in awe and trembling, every step guided by faith. The sea glowed with divine light, the air filled with the whispers of angels. Fear melted into wonder, despair into hope, as God's presence led them forward. Behind them, Pharaoh's army followed, pride blinding them to the miraculous. And then, as the last Israelite stepped onto the far shore, Moses lowered his staff. The walls of water collapsed, swallowing chariots, horses, and men, the power of God triumphant. Silence fell. The people trembled, then bowed in gratitude, tears streaming down their faces. They had witnessed the impossible, felt the hand of God moving in their midst. Moses stood before them, humbled yet strengthened, a servant who had become a leader through obedience and faith. Sometimes salvation comes in ways beyond imagination, and only those who trust can walk through the impossible. Faith does not remove danger. It transforms it into a path of deliverance. Thus, the Israelites crossed the Red Sea, leaving slavery behind, stepping into freedom, and Moses led them, the shepherd now chosen to guide a nation. After crossing the Red Sea, the Israelites journeyed into the wilderness, their hearts filled with awe and gratitude. The land was harsh, yet freedom breathed life into their souls. Moses led them through deserts, mountains, and valleys, every step guided by the unseen hand of God. One day, Moses climbed Mount Sinai, leaving the people at the foot of the mountain. The mountain was shrouded in cloud, smoke, and fire, a holy presence that made the earth tremble. Thunder rolled, lightning flashed, and the voice of God echoed like the roar of eternity. "Come up here, Moses. I will give you my law, that the people may live in righteousness." Moses ascended, his heart pounding with reverence. On the summit, God inscribed commandments on tablets of stone, laws for a nation chosen to reflect his will. The words were eternal, sacred, and heavy with divine authority. Moses held the tablets with awe, feeling the weight of responsibility and the depth of God's mercy. Meanwhile, the people below grew restless. In their fear and impatience, they fashioned a golden calf, seeking comfort in false idols. When Moses descended and saw their sin, his heart burned with grief. Yet he did not abandon them. He interceded, pleading for their forgiveness, reminding them of God's covenant and mercy. Through this, the Israelites learned that freedom was not just leaving slavery behind. It was learning obedience, faith, and the weight of choice. Moses, once a shepherd of sheep, now shepherded a nation, teaching them to walk in the ways of God. The mountain and the commandments became a symbol of divine presence, guidance, and covenant. Through fire, smoke, and voice of God, the Israelites understood that their journey was more than escape. It was preparation for a life aligned with divine purpose. Sometimes the greatest lessons come with challenge, patience, and reverence. Faith is not only about seeing miracles, but also about learning to obey, trust, and choose the right path. Thus ended the journey of deliverance from Egypt, but the journey of faith, obedience, and covenant had just begun. Moses stood as the faithful servant, lawgiver, and shepherd of God's people, guiding them into a future shaped by divine promise. The story of Moses is more than a tale of miracles, deserts, and plagues. It is a story of faith tested, courage challenged, and obedience rewarded. From the basket on the Nile to the tablets of stone on Mount Sinai, every moment of his life carries lessons that transcend time. We see that life often calls us to step into the unknown. Moses fled the palace in fear, yet God called him back to face Pharaoh. Similarly, we may feel unprepared for challenges in our own lives, a new job, a difficult decision, or a relationship strained by trials. Yet courage is not the absence of fear, it is acting faithfully despite it. Faith is another lesson. Moses trusted God even when the path seemed impossible, the Red Sea before him, Pharaoh's army behind him. In our daily lives, we encounter obstacles that seem insurmountable. Financial struggles, health concerns, personal doubts. Faith reminds us that we are not alone, and that every challenge can become an opportunity for growth and guidance. Obedience is also central. Moses followed God's command, even when it was uncomfortable or dangerous. We too are called to act with integrity, honesty, and compassion in our homes, workplaces, and communities. Small acts of obedience and kindness ripple outward, shaping our lives and the lives of those around us. The story of Moses is also about transformation. A shepherd became a leader, a fugitive became a prophet, a man became the voice of God's law. We are reminded that our own struggles, patience, and perseverance can prepare us for purposes greater than ourselves. Life may bring deserts of uncertainty, storms of fear, and walls that seem impossible to cross. But like Moses, we can walk forward with faith, courage, and obedience, trusting that every step has meaning. Let us remember, God equips those He calls, strengthens those He guides, and provides a path through every challenge. The story of Moses is not only history, it is a mirror for our own journey, inspiring us to rise, to trust, and to lead with love. Every story reminds us, God's hand still moves, His voice still speaks, and His love never fades. This is Divine Chronicles.